Right. Sports writer and historian David Goldblatt will talk politics and soccer at Taylor's Hall in the Liberties in Dublin this Saturday, November the 23rd. His new book is The Age of Football. It's been getting rave reviews in the OTB office and beyond. That talk is part of the Festival of Politics. It starts at 5 o'clock. Tickets are $7.99. Students and OAP tickets are just $5.99. Here is David Goldblatt speaking to Eoin and Arthur O'D. Have a look.
Okay, so whenever David Goldblatt puts his name on a book, you tend to need to pick it up and read it because they tend to be excellent. His newest one is out now. It's The Age of Football, the global game in the 21st century. And I'm delighted to say that David Goldblatt is on the line. Good morning to you, David. How are things?
I'm all right. Thanks for having me.
So this is fairly broad, to say the least, The Age of Football. Let's leave it up to you. What is the most important thing, what is the most interesting thing that you learned during what I assume was unbelievably extensive research for this book?
Well, thinking it over, I guess it's that football, which has always been popular, is more popular than ever. In fact, it is the most popular of all popular cultural phenomena in this globalised world. I mean, when I wrote The Ball is Round back in 2006, you know, the state of football in the three biggest countries in the world, China, India and the United States, is pretty marginal. And here we are, you know, around 20 years later, and now football is unquestionably the game of modern China, with, you know, the Communist Party officially committing to achieving Xi Jinping's three wishes: to win, to host, to qualify for and to win the World Cup. In India, although cricket is still king, you know, football is coming up very fast. And in the United States, it is now a totally sustainable, fixed element of the sporting universe. So I just find that extraordinary. It's always been popular. It's been the world's game for a long time, but its status is just unequivocal.
Why is the status growing, do you think? Is it because the financial injections that FIFA has? Is it because of the power it already had, that once you have a fairly big thing, it can easily get bigger? Because I'm sure, as we get into in this conversation, there are many things wrong with football, of course, on a global scale at the moment, but yet it is growing bigger and bigger and bigger. Why do you think that is?
Well, I think television is pretty central. The digital revolution has made the best football more accessible than ever before. And I think, you know, football being played at the highest level in Europe, where all the kind of concentrated resources, the talent, capital, the technology is concentrated, we're looking at the best football that's ever been played. So at that level, it's, you know, in a way not surprising. I think it's also emerged, you know, this globalisation of the game has emerged in an era where, I suppose, sort of ideology is on the way out, and politicians increasingly look for narratives and meanings and identities that football offers and get on board. And that has kind of supercharged the significance of the game when you've got, you know, entire nation states and ruling elites backing the game in a way that we've never seen before.
That's an interesting thing, and it's something that we can speak about in all walks of life. It's a conversation that comes up very regularly, the intersection between politics and sport, and there is no question that politics can affect sport. Politicians have a huge impact on sport. And I'm interested in your take on how it works the other way around, because the conversation we would have been having most recently on the show was actually to do with rugby and South Africa winning the Rugby World Cup, and their captain, Siya Kolisi, coming from a township in South Africa to actually captain the team, and he spoke about the unifying impact of sport on South Africa. Whereas some of us would perhaps view that with a little more cynicism, that it is this fleeting moment on a big euphoric moment for a nation, but sport perhaps doesn't have that power. But maybe football is the sport that has that power. I'm not sure what your thoughts are on that, David.
Well, I think stopping short of the sort of, you know, euphoric power of individual moments, important as I think those continue to be, you know, football's actually generated social forces and social movements in the last 20 years that are having, you know, a huge impact on the way nations operate. I mean, the most obvious is Tahrir Square, Egypt, 2011. You know, the Arab Spring begins, and a significant percentage of the people in Tahrir Square are Egyptian football ultras from both Al Ahly and Zamalek, who form up basically once they're in the square. And they're the only people pretty much in Egypt who've got the experience and the solidarity to face off the police. No one else has dared do that for a very long time in Mubarak's Egypt, and they become sort of entwined with the uprising. So, football creates solidarities and identities and the possibilities of sort of, opposition that actually really sometimes put people on the streets. Not always, of course, I hasten to add in, progressive form, because, we see the presence of the far right and some pretty unpleasant racist nationalist movements in football ultras in Eastern Europe and Italy. So it can work, it can work that way as well.
Like when we think about those moments as well, like obviously the scenes in Egypt are unbelievable. It is a clear evidence of the argument you're trying to make. And then perhaps kind of moving away from that singular moment for a time, the summer of 2016 is fascinating when you talk about the intersection between politics and sport. You have this massive sporting tournament obviously going on in Euro 2016 in France, and then you obviously have this massive political meltdown, some would say, going on in Great Britain as well. All while this is happening...
I think most would say.
Yeah, I think so at this point. Talk to us about that, about how those two things aren't necessarily independent of one another. England's meltdown on the football front, and then perhaps the wider United Kingdom's meltdown on a continental front as well.
I mean, it's a really interesting moment. Watching the game, I'd been at the Euros for the earlier rounds and been sort of slightly distanced from the debate on the European Union referendum, and came home about 4 or 5 days before it. And my stomach turned when I got home. I just knew that it was going to be leave. There was just something really so clearly in the air. I couldn't put my finger on it, but I just knew it. And having watched England stumble through the early stages, this sort of stuttering performance, it was extraordinary. We just scraped through, and then we vote to leave the European Union. And 2 days later, we're facing Iceland in the round of 16. And it was like, as Edward Galeano says, show me how you play and I'll tell you who you are. And on that day, we were all like rabbits in the headlights, team and nation, given what was in front of them. I mean, it was one of the most extraordinary displays, of football I've seen in a long while. I don't know if you watched it, but I mean, it was like England were strangely frozen.
Yeah, it was an extraordinary night, all right, and the kind of the emotional high. I don't even know if it was an emotional high at that moment when they take the lead, because it kind of seemed, this is Iceland, we can take the lead against anybody. But are you surprised, I wonder, with everything that's happened, how this England team has emerged since 2016, that Gareth Southgate is the manager of this England team? I don't know what way Gareth Southgate votes, unless I've missed some sort of political interviews done, but he does seem like a very un-Brexit sort of man, to put it bluntly.
I mean, I think, there are lots of different strands, to the story of the England team under Gareth Southgate. I mean, I think in contrast to the kind of the rudeness and the disingenuousness of what passes for public conversation in this country during and since the referendum, he just is a breath of fresh air. And I think people have really enormously warmed to that, in the way he makes decisions, what he talks to the players about, how he interacts with the media, how he interacts with the wider world. People really like that. And I think, it's a really, the story of the referendum and and leave and the feel of the country is very much a story of older folks. I mean, as I'm sure you're aware, overwhelmingly the vote to leave is from older people, and youth has been squeezed in so many ways in Britain in an era of austerity financially, in the jobs market and the housing market. And I think, again, it's been so warming to see such a young team, actually quite an inexperienced team. I think they had the fewest caps at 2018 at the World Cup of any side, and I think we're the second youngest next to Nigeria. So I think that's been a factor. And of course they're good. Just all really good players. The fruits of, finally of 25 years of the Premier League has produced a small fraction of players who are really, some really exceptional, some very good. So I think, and also just very diverse. I mean, it's another England, isn't it? When you look at that team, Eric Dyer's, born in Portugal. Trent Alexander could have played for the US. Harry Kane's got Irish roots. It's a really mixed bag.
David, on the question of the Premier League, you wrote about sort of the global commercialism of it and the strength of that as a global market as opposed to something distinct from England itself, despite being hosted there. I'm just curious if you could expand on that and what way that played into the emergence of a 2016 Brexit vote and the kind of fall away of England before this resurgence.
Interesting question. I mean, I think the Premier League exemplifies the globalised sort of neoliberal nature of the UK economy, and that's not really actually very much to do with being in the European Union. I mean, that's about how the economy interacts with the world as a whole. And, in some sectors, Britain has been, most obviously financed, extraordinarily successful. And there are many, many kind of winners from globalisation in this country as a consequence. And I think the Premier League is one of those rare spaces where Britain is a winner from globalisation. England is a winner from globalisation. And if you concentrate talent and capital and money all in one place, then you're going to get great results. I think it has also, part of the reason the Premier League is so successful alongside that, by comparison to, La Liga or the Bundesliga, is that the atmosphere of the stadiums and the look of the spectacle and the narratives of the teams and the clubs are more comprehensible globally. People like it. People are tapping into, what is in effect 130 years professional urban football, maybe more. It's like 150, isn't it? And, somehow the English crowd is still singing. And that, I think, is very appealing. Now, the question, how long can it last? And how long will we stand, the sort of huge inequalities that come with it? I mean, it's a bit like in the realm of the Brexit vote, it seemed that people had had enough of globalisation. But in the realm of football, it's still in the balance. But, it's so incredibly unequal and so incredibly increasingly stage-managed, and so increasingly populated by the elderly. The average age of the Premier League audience is in the high 40s, heading to 50. How long will that be interesting?
Is that the same case when you're looking at the other markets you mentioned at the start, when it comes to China, when it comes to India, when it comes to the United States? Is the Premier League an outlier there when it comes to people in the UK, age-wise?
In terms of the audience that's watching it on television, I mean, I think the audience that's watching it, globally, is younger, right. Sure. I mean, the rest of the world just is younger. We're an old society. I mean, in terms of attendances, again, it tends to be the young in those places, or in the case of Africa, almost no one. Because, of course, one of the side effects of the Premier League, as with all sort of global economies, is people on the periphery get hollowed out. So African football, domestic football, which 30 years ago, had huge, and often respectable crowds and a rich kind of journalistic and fan culture, has been decimated by the fact that around 400 to 500 million Africans are watching the Premier League every week.
And David, I'm curious, just with the general sort of negativity that's inevitably has to be covered in the book, do you find that it's hampered your enjoyment of football at all?
Oh, yes and no. I mean, it's hard. It's hard sometimes to turn it off. On the other hand, as I said, what's actually being played, at the top level of the Champions League is the most exceptional football I've ever seen. I mean, Brazil 1970 would not live with the top, teams in the Champions League. Never mind the magical Magyars. This is the business. And, last season's semi-finals in the Champions League, I just thought were completely extraordinary. And I still enjoy, going to see, Bristol Rovers, who are my local team. And I still love the weeness and the communality of football. But yeah, one struggles. I mean, but I don't think this is just football. I mean, I think, football shining a light on practices much more wide than just football. Football's a problem, but the world itself is a bigger problem.
The book is The Age of Football, The Global Game in the 21st Century. It's written by David Goldblatt, and it is out now. David, thanks a million for taking the call. Really appreciate it.